time to join us in the gathering place where we offer hope as we discuss mental, emotional, and spiritual well being. It's a lovely, lovely snowy Sunday our way, and wherever you happen to be in the world, we understand your weather would be different. But for us, we slid our way into service this morning, and then we came back home and had the weekly Sunday afternoon nap. I think that's a customary for all church going people. And now you're here for the gathering place. And the gathering place is exactly that. It's just a conversation. We have tried really hard to create an atmosphere that is fun and entertaining, and yet in which we can talk about serious issues and offer some help. Uh, Tonight, we have a couple of our partners in crime that are unable to be with us tonight. Tom and Kevin are both busy. But Gallagher, Gallagher has decided to show up. And
Our son's
this
probably home.
Amazon's here.
Oh, Amazon.
yeah. If you don't know me, my name's Ken Shelton. You probably know me because you're probably on my Facebook page right now. But I pastored for 38 years, and now I'm just doing this. And so Ben and Talora are the heavy hitters here. Ben and Talora both are licensed professional counselors in the state of Michigan and ordained ministers with Evangel Association of Churches and Ministries. And they have a wonderful counseling practice, Quies Christian Counseling Services, and that is in Belding, Michigan, and in Lansing, Michigan. And so I'm going to turn this over to them right now. I'm going to lead off with Ben because this is February. It's Black History Month, but it is also the Valentine's Day, All Things Love Month. So Ben, Talora, it's always fun to be together.
All right. Hopefully you can hear me over Gallagher because he's excited about Amazon being here. So
we can hear you fine. Gallagher is competing for attention, but that's okay.
He is. So he's running back and forth from the window to the door. I don't know what he's hoping for, but so yeah, as Ken said, February is many things, but it is the month of love, and we're going to focus on marriage, love, relationships this month. And one of the things, though, today we're just going to talk about amongst the three of us, just like some things that we all think are important as a foundation for a healthy marriage and relationship. And we'll never cover everything. I mean, people write thick books about this, right? So and we have a lot of them. Like, if you look at all the books like that Talora and I have on marriage and relationships, I mean, it's like, I don't know, what you think, 2-3 foot shelves just full, maybe more than that, honestly. We have a lot of books on that. Do I have any of them here with me? Of course not, because they're all at the offices. But that'd make life way too easy. But so we just want to talk about some of those things though that we find important. And I was thinking, this is kind of a coincidence that happened today, right? So our pastor was talking about singing hymns and how for years, like, they were singing Sweet Beulah Land, and he had no idea what Beulah was.
There was a lady in our church named Beulah. But
in my church too when I was growing up. So
there was a lady used to live next door to, or lived a house down from my grandparents in Indiana. That was Beulah.
Well, do you know what Beulah it means?
Well, I guess I really don't. So go ahead, Ben. And
I found out this afternoon. It was a pure coincidence because I was just like looking things up. It's used once in the Hebrew to reference Jerusalem, but it means married. So
there you go.
And it makes sense because how often does God talk about his relationship with us as marriage?
Right.
And God instituted marriage from the get-go with Adam and Eve. I mean, so clearly this is something that's important, and God designed us, created us for relationships. You know, I always do the joke. It's not really a joke, but it kind of is a joke. Maybe it's more sarcastic. God made Adam, and he's looking. He's like, oh, it wasn't good for, it's not good for man to be alone, as if that were a surprise to God. He knew that he was creating Adam, but he also knew he was creating Eve, because we need to be in a relationship. And
Right.
but we also know, because Adam screwed up, and our relationships aren't perfect, and they're difficult sometimes. So how do we really get into a healthy relationship? So I'll ask Talora first and put her on the spot to just talk about one thing that you find or you believe that's really important about a healthy foundation for a marriage.
Well, one of the things, and Ben and I have counseled people, a lot of couples and married couples that aren't married, but they're living together. And one of the first things I would say is having a healthy communication as a foundation. Because if you aren't able to talk with your spouse, you're going to find other outlets. And in those other outlets, it's going to shift into something that's not healthy. And that's why your spouse should be the first. Not that you can't talk to other people, but your spouse should always be, first we go to God, then we go to the spouse. So that, yeah. What's your thought?
A wise counselor, right? The Bible talks about there's not just like licensed people like us, but the Bible talks about there's wisdom in having those wise people around us and going to them. So,
well, and the other thing I think too, one of the other questions I use in counseling a lot is, well, what does your husband say about that? Or what is your, what did this person say about that? Because we need to have good supports in our lives. We need to have people that we can trust, confidants. But what's it called? Fault vault, right?
Right.
There was a minister that came to our church one time, and his name was Ken Shelton, and he talked about fault vaults. And that's having someone you can trust. Sometimes maybe your spouse isn't that a person that you can share certain things with, but it should be the person that's your big confidant. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think.
I would say, like, how much time all of us spend talking and working with people about how to be able to talk to their spouse. And it's Ken, what you do, what Talora and I do, it's really a sacred thing, because people tell us things that they don't tell anyone else, including their spouse.
That's right.
And sometimes those are things that they need to tell their spouse or their partner, and but they don't know how.
That's what I was going to ask Ken though too. Is like, you've been married for like 15 years, right? Because you're only 30.
Right. 50 years and 8 months.
Yeah.
50.
So what do you think about the communication thing?
Well, I think obviously that communication is a cornerstone. Good communication is a cornerstone. The funny thing about communication is that it's so much less about what we say and so much more about how we say it, when we say it, where we say it, why we say it. I know that sounds ridiculous if you haven't really studied communication, but the vast majority of information or understanding that comes from a conversation comes from nonverbal cues, how we position ourselves, something called proxemics, where if I'm talking with my wife, am I going to just mention this thing off the cuff and therefore give the idea that it's not such a big deal? Or maybe she's not even fully listening? Or am I going to take time and look her in the eye and have a real conversation? We're close together in proximity. Um, so it's tricky though, because even though our spouse is, I only have one spouse, so I hesitated there for a minute, but even though your spouse is intended to be the person that you share life with, we each come into a marriage with lived experiences and sometimes baggage that we don't even really know that we have because we haven't been married before, or maybe we have, but we think this one is a fresh start. And so sometimes the baggage, the heavy issues, we can talk about them sometimes in a way that insinuates that we expect our spouse to have the answer for that thing. And we can burden them with our burdens. So it's a very fine line that on some issues that we have to think about. Do I want to weigh him down? Do I want to weigh her down? Most of the time, it's important to share all of those things. But, we speak rhetorically sometimes. We say, I don't know what to do in this situation. We really don't want an answer. We just want to put it out there.
Right.
And so ideally, you could go to your spouse and you could talk about your feelings and share everything. But not all marriages are in that place. And so some of them are fragile. And if you bring up deep thoughts and feelings, especially if the other person has struggled with anxiety or depression, you can quickly add to their load.
Yeah.
So I think having a good place to go as a couple, good counselors. And this is a plug for you guys, not intended to be a plug, but I'm glad to do it because I think that having a place to just lay it out there. Yeah, vault, right. You can go and share what's wrong, what's not working, and it's locked up with that person. They're not going to talk about it.
No, sometimes it's
yes,
just having
communication
someone
is tricky. So
well, sometimes it's just having someone to process those things too, so oh, okay, so that's really what the issue is. Now I know what to talk about. The other thing that we have found in marriage counseling or couples counseling, if there's been infidelity or any type of maybe a pornography addiction, those type of areas, the spouse that's the victim of the relation or in the relationship doesn't want to hear everything. They can't handle it. They want to hear it, but they don't want to hear it.
right.
And so then I believe that you need someone that you can vault so you can talk about it and talk about those things that were going on that maybe you can't talk to your spouse about. And maybe it's not healthy.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So we're talking about communication, right? We're communicating about that. So Ken, what's something for you that is important foundationally for a healthy relationship?
Honor. I think mutual honor, that when a couple decide to make a commitment to live together the rest of their lives, inherent in that agreement should be a willingness and insistence, really, that I'm going to honor my wife. And if I put everything that I bring to her through the filter of honor, it will shape how I say the things I need to say to her. Because even though I might need to bring up some heavy information, or she might need to tell me something that's very difficult for me to hear. If it's done through the filter of honor, it comes out as a blessing, because both people know that no harm is meant, that it's intended to build. You know, there's a place in the book of Isaiah. I'm going to say it's chapter 61, just off the cuff trying to remember. But it talks about, if you will honor the Lord and stop being demanding to people and stop accusing people, and if you will stop pretending to be religious and fasting food visibly so other people can see, but instead fast something and take those resources and feed the hungry and the poor and the needy. He said, if you do those things, you will be called. And then he lists quite a few very vivid images. And one of them is repairer of the breach. You will be called a repairer of the breach. What's a breach? A break. A break in the wall. Yeah, marriages have a break in the wall sometimes.
Mhm.
And so if we go into a relationship honorably and we maintain that honor, if we see something breaking, we don't play ostrich. You know, we don't stick our head in the sand. We talk about it through the filter of honor. So that's what I would add.
Mhm. Yeah. And you
How
brought
do you
up,
do that though? How do you think we honor people, Ben? How do you think we honor somebody that we know so intimately?
Mhm. Well, I think part of that is that piece of it, though, is knowing them intimately, knowing all of those ways, because how we feel honored, how we receive that from other people is different to each of us in a lot of ways. But um, one of it, let's see if I can speak English. One of the ways that I believe that we do that, of course, I mean, kind of goes along with the communication and honoring, but um, and it's this piece of trust and you know and love. I mean, but they're not the same. I think we confuse those a lot. I can love you and not trust you. Talora was talking about, when people have betrayed their spouse. you know your spouse might still love you but may not trust you. And but even in those situations, how do we honor? Well, part of that is, I do things that are trustworthy and I act in a way that is trustworthy. um, and that means, and it could mean a lot of things, but I was thinking about this, the whole idea about betrayal. If you know that you have an issue with looking at pornography on the internet and are not honoring your spouse in that, you may need to do something really radical, such as don't have access to the internet.
Yeah.
You know, and people, like, I've said this to people, and like, you think that was like the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, but if you want to, and it's usually guys, but not always. If you want to honor your wife, well, don't give yourself away to get into the temptation. Because what could be more honoring to her than to do something that's so trustworthy? It's not. We don't live in an age where I get to go defend your honor on my knight, or my knight as in like a knight on my steed with my sword, and we don't. That's not a thing. So we miss these seemingly smaller but so very important ways to honor. And it could be even, but it could be these small little things like, um I remember, yeah, like it could be like bringing your spouse breakfast in bed, because that he likes, you know bacon and eggs on Saturday morning, and you bring, and or husbands, do that for your wife, and it seems such a small thing, right? But if you know that's something like she loves that's important to her, that makes her feel loved, then why wouldn't we do that? And and I would even add, I'm going to bring up the dirty word, submission, which again has been very abused in the church. Mean things that it does not mean. But when God talks to us, he's first he says submit to one to another, and then he tells us how and what love looks like. And loving your wife looks like loving as Christ did. And it tells wives in the same way, right? Respect your husbands. So what does that look like? Really, we're talking about honor in both cases, but it's in that area of submission. And so it's not a dirty word. And my quick little summary of submission is in the Greek world, the word that they use was used of like a general. A general is not going to take you to a place where he wants you to win, right? He wants you to succeed. He wants you to be safe. That's his job. And and a general in that army went first. Right? He wasn't hiding in the back. He was leading. And so, that's how we honor each other in this relationship.
It probably looks like I've checked out, but I'm looking up a verse based on what you said, and I will share it. So in Ephesians in the New Testament, chapter 5 and verse 21, that's the passage where Paul instructs us to submit to one another. And from I had to just double check before I laid this out there because I didn't want to say something that wasn't really true about it. But this word that's used for submit or submission, really, that's exactly what it means. But it also means to subordinate reflexively, and that there's an obedience in it. So I know that in marriage vows, we used to say, love, honor, do you honor, will you submit to your husband? It was always one-sided. But Paul said here in Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. The bigger picture is that your marriage is intended to be a microcosm of a larger spiritual metaphor. So that my marriage, I have no trouble submitting. You've heard people say this in a speech. I would submit to you today. Well, what does that mean? That means I present it to you. I subordinate it to you for your inspection. It's not an act. It's an atmosphere. It's a way of living that I am submitted to my wife, and my wife is submitted to me. And the reason it's that way is because we are submitted to Christ and we revere and honor him.
And I
There's
think
no other way to revere and honor the Lord. How can you revere and honor him if you're not going to be submissive? That's what discipleship is, right? Discipline.
And I think that's just, sorry. I think that society has misconstrued, and women, and I'm just going to throw out the word feminist, right? That movement has really clouded what relationships are supposed to be like in the marriage and the home.
Mhm.
And as women, I mean, we're stepping away from what we were designed for, what we were created for, because we want to fight. But I mean, isn't that what it says in Genesis, that we're going to come up against our husbands and men and fight about?
As a part of the curse, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a reason that God created each of us, and I think it's also, you know, in the spousal relationship, like Ben has these gifts and talents that are so extraordinary. And then I come alongside him and we just kind of meld together. Like I would say I'm the smarter one in the relationship. I like to keep a clean area. No, I don't. That was a big joke. All of that. My husband he's phenomenal. He knows everything. I always ask him questions. Well, what about this? What does that mean? How long's a meter? Like, how long's a meter in inches? Or whatever, Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, I think that all of the things that we said so far are possible if we know that our marriage is safe,
Yeah.
that it is a safe place.
Yes.
Submission was scary for so many years because
Mhm.
marriage wasn't safe. The man could do what he wanted to do. The women did what they were told, and they did it right. Unless you were wealthy enough to hire maids and butlers, and then they did it right. So we have to redeem terminology. I think that's a really important thing. The culture over the last several hundred years, well, it's much longer than that, but in the American version of our dialect, our vernacular, the way we speak, the way we say things, the culture at large has co opted certain words and redefined them. I'm going to beat him into submission. Well, you just messed up the whole idea of submission.
Yeah.
We submit from a position of strength, not of weakness. I submit because I can, not because I have to.
Yeah.
And I easily submit to my wife because she's so open and submissive to me.
Yeah.
So in
It's
the
a gift.
spirit of that
Yeah.
little thing I said about I submit to you, basically we're saying that to our spouse. I sub
Mhm.
I submit myself to you, not
Mhm.
in an action or a deed, but in an atmosphere.
Well, and I do want to add this, that there are abusive relationships out there, and because
Yeah.
I have been a victim of domestic violence, and I want to make that little note for everyone that there are times where it is not healthy and there is nothing you can do about it. Obviously we can pray, but sometimes we have to separate ourselves and find a safe
Amen. Yep.
place.
I
and
agree
and
with that.
maybe the marriage can be repaired. I'm not saying that at all, but there's some situations where you just need to go. You just need to separate.
Ben,
um
can I just ask Ben a question about that
yeah.
real quick? Because I think it's a real important topic. Ben, um, I know this is asking a lot, but you may know rates of recidivism in domestic violence once a person has a pattern of being abusive. Is it really hard to break that cycle? How long does it take to break that cycle? Is it a 60% recidivism? Well, I don't understand that. I don't know that. I haven't researched it. And
Yeah.
by the way, if you're just watching us for the first time, Ben spent a number of years working in the prison system as a counselor. And so that's why I'm asking you that particular question.
Yeah. I don't know the recidivism rate per se, but I know without treatment or God miraculously intervening in you and changing you, which does happen, but
Yes.
typically God
I do
expects
believe that.
has this
Yeah.
expectation of us to do something. So but most domestic violence programs, at a minimum recommend a 26-week program, but 52 weeks is better. That's a weekly and intensive training and refocusing your thinking to something that's healthier. So it takes a lot of effort on your part if you are an abuser. So,
Yeah.
it's so, is it easy? It's not. And, it's but it's also, as a Christian, this is your spiritual health at a minimum at stake here. So, you should want to do that. You should want to be able to love your wife as Christ loved. If anything, because usually it's men that we talk about as the abusers, although women do abuse frequently as well. But, Christ wasn't out beating people up.
Yeah.
And in fact, he allowed himself to be beaten and to be killed. And you're, as a man, you are called to that same kind of love. And so when you're abusing, you're doing the exact opposite of what God designed for us. And so it's a significant issue, and it's a big issue. I've worked with men and women who were in maybe usually in legal trouble for domestic violence, but they can change. And that's why we do what we do. And that's why we believe, God can change people. He can change hearts and minds.
Well, and I think too, that we have to know that we can't change people. The spouse can't change somebody. A lot of times it's 7 times leaving. They leave, they come back, they leave, they come back, they leave, they come back. And it takes up to 7 times for a person to just be done. And I think too that it's hard in those situations, because if the person doesn't want to change, then they can manipulate and use those classes. I've had it happen to me where the person came back and would say basically that they mocked me, or that the leaders of the group would say things about me, about the way I treated the spouse, or and it wasn't even true. And I would just be like horrified. I didn't want these people to think that I was this awful person. And so I think we have to watch too, that our hearts have to be right. Like if we are abusing the spouse, that our hearts have to be right and going into a domestic violence group.
Yeah, it's a really serious issue, and it's more commonplace than most people think. I was just reading, again, I had to look up statistics, right? So 1 in 5 adults experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. I don't know the breadth of that statistic. I don't know what kind of violence they're speaking about, or if it's generalized violence, but 1 out of 5, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And think if you're a pastor and you have 50 people in your church, there's at least 5 situations that are going on in that midst, if not more. And
Right.
Here's the other thing, and I'm just going to say this too, is that we need to be careful as leaders and as ministers in how we speak about marriage. Because when we are in these situations and we know someone's being abused, to tell them that you're going to excommunicate them or whatever, like take them off the church, what do they call it? The
Membership roll.
yeah, because they left their spouse because they were being abused. That's wrong. I don't believe that expresses the
No,
love.
I agree. Yeah.
God
There are a
doesn't
lot
want us to be
A
harmed.
lot of ways that ministers reinforce domestic violence from a position of male dominance, intentionally or unintentionally. It is a fact. And it's just something that the culture is coming to terms with. But yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes I forget about, because I haven't been in an abusive relationship, I forget how it impacts the rest of your life. It's not in the forefront of my thinking. Till Laura, you mentioned that you've been in those situations, and
Yeah.
it must be so traumatic.
Yeah. Well, and it took a long time, even in like my relationship with Ben, to, and that had been after I had been out of an abusive relationship for like, was it 5 years, 6 years, when I started dating Ben. And I still had, I mean, there was times where it was very trigger producing, and Ben wouldn't harm me. I mean, he'll lecture me to death, but he isn't going to harm me. There's never been a fear there,
Oh, that's funny.
but um, I feel like that even today, I scream, like when people startle me, my fist comes up, because I'm just like, it's just a reaction, I'm just like ready. I'm ready. I'm ready to defend myself, because that was one of those things, is where I wasn't going to let that happen to me again. Happened to me twice. That was it. And as a Christian too, we see all the deficits in that relationship, or those relationships, and we see how there was never any of what God's planned for marriage in there. And when you start seeing some of those red flags, you should talk about them. And then if they're not received, like when you're dating, if those red flags, you see them, you say, hey, I noticed you were doing this. That made me a little bit, seems like a red flag, and that's not received. Maybe you should consider the relationship.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking, even just, I mean, a lot of people may be watching. They might be that may have happened to them in a church. And I mean, Laura and I both, I'm sure you kind of talked to a lot of people, more than I ever thought were out there, that, had, basically been kicked out of their churches, or actually kicked out of their churches, um, for having left their spouse who was
Yeah.
abusive, or failing to submit, and just love your husband more, love like God, like, so, and genuinely, if that has been you, I pray that you found a healthy church.
Yeah.
They do exist.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people aren't in abusive relationships, but they're attending those same churches where that has happened to other people. And because now you've heard this, I mean, we have an obligation biblically to defend those who are weaker.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might require you to step up and speak out at your church
Mhm.
about that issue. It probably will not be received well, even doesn't, you can do it perfectly, but it probably will not be received well. I pray it would be, that people would be, especially the pastors in those positions, that their hearts would be softened, because they do have hardened hearts there, and it's a problem. And perhaps, you might look at that like, it says a lot about the health of the church you're in.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not the only criteria, obviously, but it's an important one of how, those who are defenseless, so to speak, are treated. And so you may have difficult decisions to make in that.
Mm.
And, again, you may find like, what, like I spoke up, I spoke out about this. It was not received. I may have to move on. God may move you on. He may leave you there to fight that. I don't know. That's between you and God. But it's a big issue, but there is support even for you in that, and and find it, because there are healthy people, there are healthy groups out there that will assist you in that. And so um I know Taylor and I had talked about, like, maybe is the month of love, but talking about that in an episode, which we may do, because it's such a significant topic. We've talked about it before, I know, but at least at one point talking about, just, it may not be domestic violence, but we get hurt in relationships, and how do I handle that hurt? So it may not be physical, it may be emotional, but what do I do with that? And how do I deal with that? And because that's a important foundational piece of healthy relationships, is when I get hurt, even if it's whether it's intentional or unintentional, how do I respond to that in a healthy biblical way? And so I guess that's kind of one of the things, maybe kind of segueing, just as not even a segue, but just kind of in a continuation of that conversation. So it's not domestic violence, and it won't even say it's emotional abuse, but what do we do if we get hurt?
Yeah.
And how do we handle that?
If I may, I have a blind spot in my relationship with my wife that I know of. I grew up in a home where my father and my mother were just wonderful. My dad worked second shift, which meant that he went into work about 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, and he came home at about 11:30 at night. And so for me, didn't have a brother. I'd come home from school, and there was my sister and my mom. And they were always talking about things pertaining to, mom was trying to help my sister, move into the social thing and help her and all that. And I'm a joker. I'm just a big joker. I play jokes on people. I'll tell jokes. And sometimes I've found out by the conviction of the Holy Spirit. And I remember when it first happened. It was early on in our marriage. Kitty didn't say anything to me about it, but I realized it was a cover for cynicism, that making jokes at someone else's expense was okay, because that's how, I couldn't hit my sister. I really wasn't mad at her. I was immature enough as a kid to feel like I didn't fit in and didn't know what to do about that. But I had a sharp tongue and a quick wit. And so I could turn things around pretty quickly. And it became kind of a thing with me. My mom would discipline me. I would say, I'm sorry. I would not do anything to hurt my sister, but that's something that somehow seemed like it was okay. There was a blind spot for me. My wife, on the other hand, she now grew up in a home like an only child. She wasn't an only child. She was her father's only child. She had two siblings, a sister and a brother. Her mom's first husband, who had passed away, they were 20 years older than my wife, and 20 and 21 years older than my wife. So by the time Kitty came along, she was raised alone, by parents who were already, at 40. And so she didn't have a brother that teased her. So she hadn't been conditioned to how annoying a brother can be. I laugh about it because my sister and I have talked about it a lot. I mean, she just, she said, I really didn't like you for a number of years. I said, yeah, I know, but you loved me. So I realized early on in our marriage, there was a blind spot for me, because guys talk smack all the time. Why we do it, I don't know. It's a guy thing to talk smack.
It's how you know you're accepted.
I'm sorry?
It's how you know you're accepted.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right. You get kind of back and forth a little bit, and but then it doesn't really work well for your wife. It's not always a good thing because it's like getting snapped by a towel. It can hurt. And when I realized I was doing it, and then when my wife, we're talking 45 and 50 years ago, in the first 5 years of our marriage, when my wife's feelings were hurt, that would irritate me because that's what my sister would have said. And this is the point I'm getting to. I had unknowingly introduced a sibling element of a previous relationship with my sister, a sibling rivalry element into our marriage. And so now marriage had become somewhat competitive.
Mm,
Is that making sense?
yeah.
I'm not saying it was good. It was bad. I mean, it shouldn't have happened. And we've had a good marriage. We've gotten along. We've had some bumps, but we're here and we're deeply in love with each other. But I introduced that sibling rivalry that I had with my sister because it was the pattern of my life. I introduced that into our marriage. And my wife didn't need a sibling rivalry. She needed a white knight.
Mhm.
And I was the court jester. And so anyway, I felt like I needed to say that only because guys do that a lot. I'm sure they do. I know they do. And sometimes they do it publicly and humiliate their wife. And I am really grateful
Yep.
to the Holy Spirit and to my mentors who saw those patterns and said, you need to stop that.
Yeah.
But most of all, I'm grateful to my wife for not taking smack.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
Without
that's
any smile on her face or without any pretense, just saying, I'm not available for that.
so Ben and I remember when we first got married, we were arguing about something. And in my family, you joke. Everything's a joke. Funeral, you joke it. Wherever you are at, you tell a joke. You also tell a joke during conflict because it diffuses the situation.
It can.
Yeah. Well, it didn't. It did not diffuse the situation. And Ben says that is so disrespectful. And now I try not. I like you were saying. I check myself and try not to do it. There was a time, and I know this is from my past relationships where I viewed Ben as the enemy. It's taken me a long time to get to a place, where we're at, but where I would see him as the enemy. He like I had to defend myself. I had, like I was protecting myself, not necessarily like an enemy, but just that I couldn't trust him. Like he wasn't.
And I think it's an important piece. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it was your sibling or an ex or even your parents. All of our previous relationships come into your marriage relationship,
Every one of them. Yep.
and we need to be so aware of that. So, talking foundationally, man, like examine all of those relationships, and which is a big deal, and you're not going to be able to do it all at once. So
Right.
take that pressure off of yourself. But we do the things we do for a reason, and those reasons are in our past. So let's figure that out. And I was thinking, because I forgot to say this earlier when you were talking about honor, but part of that honor is I and I guess we can thank my mom for this, but I don't speak disparagingly of Tulora to anyone.
He better.
And
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just
but
kidding.
I don't, right? Even if I'm ticked off at her, right? That's for us. And it doesn't mean like I may not ask somebody for advice, like if I needed to, but those things are for us. So that's an important piece like of that honor. And and so I mean, you heard her speak kind of that same way about me She'll speak disparagingly of herself, which, that's her issue to deal with. But so, but that, it's so important to be able to do that. And, so recognizing, I get all of this from somewhere. Some relationship in the past is in this, and also just that honor about, I will, I don't know, guys are cheerleaders now, so I will be her biggest cheerleader in things, and that's cool, right? Like, I don't have to be front and center. She speaks at women's events, and she's available, so if anybody wants to hire her, right? But that's great. Like, I will support that every day. So, because I want her to do that, and
He's so
she,
sweet.
on that note, if you go to I think it's on our Facebook page, she shared it, she has a blog that we did with Grace Story Ministries, which is an organization that we support. And
Phenomenal.
so even in those things, right? I mean, so, taking that moment just to brag, I guess, on her, because she won't do it herself. But those things are important. And so I want to, bring out those two things, but mostly because I forgot about the other comment about when you were talking about honor earlier.
One of the things too, I'll just say this little thing. One of the things I love about Ben is we can go to a restaurant, and if we've been there before, I can just look at him and say, "What do I like this?" And I'll ask him questions about the food, and he's like, "You tried that last time, too. I'm not sure why you're going to order that again." So, but I know, but that's
institutional memory.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I know, I love it. But that's going back to that whole thing of how do you balance each other out? And I'm sure, like with you and Kitty, because Kitty's she's very laid back. And you're like, right?
Well, thanks for telling on me there, Taylor.
I think everyone already knew, Ken.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're with me, if you're with us for any length of time, you'll find that's true.
Yeah, but that's how we I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this. That's how we complement each other. And that's why I really believe that God has the perfect mate for us. Mm-hmm. It's really strange though, with Ben and I, there were so many instances where we most likely crossed paths, or it was set where we could have crossed paths. And I think it's really interesting that we didn't meet until there was some healing for both of us and growing and maturing. I think one of our biggest things was one of our biggest fights really was always about what church we were going to go to, in the beginning.
I'd also like to point out that some of those times we would have crossed paths were like when I was a freshman in high school and she was a senior, because she is older than I am. So that probably wouldn't have been the most appropriate thing. So, but, and I do want to say when we think about, God does have the right person or perfect person for us, they might be a complete jerk, but God uses those things, even our suffering, to grow us spiritually. And so sometimes, again, not domestic violence and things like that, but, sometimes God placed you with that for your own good in some sense. And what is that? And sometimes that's super hard to see. And you might need a lot of support in that to stay in that relationship. Everybody's got their different views on divorce and when it's acceptable, and we're not talking about that, but that's between you and God, and you need to have questions. There's lots of books on it. There's lots of people who will give you their thoughts on what the Bible says about it. But like, how do I use, and not just marriage, but maybe you have a boss who's difficult, so all of these things, like, how are those used? and it's really a foundational thing. I mean, we haven't really talked about like how we deal with conflict and things like that, which are also important. But I had a supervisor at a place I worked. I was there 1 year. I started the first working day of that year, and my last working day at that place was the last working day of that calendar year. So I was there
It
a
was a
year.
good place to work, right? No.
Worst place I've ever worked in my life.
Wow.
And but and then I went to the prison to work. And that was I worked in a prison and it was better than this place, which on the
Wow.
surface should have been a healthy place emotionally, mentally to work. And it was not. It was probably like emotionally the unsafest place I ever worked, mentally the unsafest place I've ever worked. But I also learned a lot. But I also went into it once I recognized like, oh, like something's wrong in this place. Of like, all right, well, what am I going to learn here? And part of what I learned a few things, but one of the things I learned was, just, like I kind of talked about this earlier, like how do we really defend those who maybe are afraid to speak up? Like I had already decided, like I didn't care, like go ahead and fire me or whatever. I knew I'd be okay. But there were people who were genuinely afraid of losing their jobs and were afraid to speak up about things that were going on. But we'd have staff meetings, all staff, right? And then there'd be me every time they did something, like got a comment or a question, right? But and like I'd never done that. And I was more likely to be the one to be afraid to speak up. But that God really used that to be like, you know what, like you need to know when to speak up and how to do that. And so I learned a lot. And so even though it was legitimately a horrible, toxic place to be, there was also so beneficial. I wouldn't go back there, but unless God made me. But I don't feel like He will. But it's a very different and a difficult thing to do in a relationship, to be like, all right, like this right now doesn't feel good. This is hard. What am I learning? Like, God, how are you using this to grow me? And to be looking for that and expecting it. Talking about like biblical expectation where we know God's using this.
Yeah. Sometimes it's difficult for us to face the truth about ourselves and to face the truth about what we need. And there's a scripture in the book of Hebrews about the way the Lord shows his love to us is that he disciplines us. And sometimes he disciplines us by putting us in a place of employment or in a church situation where we have to see ourselves. That place becomes a mirror and we see ourselves through it. And it helps us grow. It helps us change. Mm-hmm. It's painful, but it's important. I have a good friend, but for years he helped me as we started our church, Bob Sullivan. Bob and Sandy Sullivan, great people. They live in Florida now. But one of his go-to sayings was, and he was a good teacher, good Bible teacher. He said, God will either bless or afflict you with people according to your need.
Mm-hmm.
I always hated it when he said that, but it was true. God will bless or afflict you with people according to your need. What do you need? Well, why is that irritating person in my life? Because that's how you treat your wife, or it could be something like that, or it could be completely coincidental, but you have to see it and figure it out and understand. I think this month's series that you've selected, Ben and Talora, is going to be really good. And I appreciate your leadership in that.
I think we'll have a good time. I know Talora's working on another special guest. I don't know if she did that yet or not.
And I think Ken's got a couple too that he
So
wants.
you got some you're working on.
Mhm.
So
In time.
So we'll have some more special guests at some point. You know, and we're definitely gonna, I think, delve more into like what happens when we're hurt. We're gonna talk about, you know, just those difficult times, right? We talked about you talked about the marriage vows earlier, right? For better or for worse. Well, what happens when it's for worse? You know, what do you do, you know, when your spouse is ill or has an accident or you know, with, you know, you lose your house, whatever it might be, like, you know, what do we do in those times? And we'll talk, you know, more about also the good pieces of love and marriage, and because there's so much good to talk about, and we've only, like I said, we could only scratch the surface tonight. I know we're out of time, but you know, but
What-
also, well, go ahead.
I was just going to interject. No, there was something you said to me once about being in marriage that it was something you didn't expect. Do you remember that?
I don't know, but I'm sure it was brilliant, whatever it was.
It was. You were saying that you didn't expect maybe the confidence you
Oh,
would feel.
the feeling of security.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
confidence and the security. And I
I would
think
like
that
to, I would like to pick up on that. Are you saying that Ben said that he didn't realize the sense of security that would come from being married?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Oh, I just need
Yeah,
to
yeah.
clarify
Like
myself.
it was like a
Oh,
confidence
you're
in
right. I told
Yeah.
Kitty this morning on the way to church, I said, you know, and this is where we are in our relationship now after 50 years and for quite some time. But I said, you know, when I was younger, when I was a teenager or a college age student, uh, I said, in my wildest dreams, I had never imagined that I would have a romantic relationship with a woman who is so perfectly fit for me and that I seem to be for her. And I just praise her every time I get a chance. I'm not bragging on myself. I didn't always do stuff like that. I was just myself. I wasn't mean or anything, but you know, I get up in the morning when she does. She's teaching school. I make her breakfast. I take her coffee. I do that every morning, unless I'm not feeling well or something. Um, I drive her to work, pick her up from work because I want to be with her. Um, and when you're raising kids, sometimes you're so busy.
Yeah.
And I know people watching us probably have a wide array of life circumstances, but when we were raising our three daughters, we were as much in love then as we are now, but you're so busy. And by the end of the day, you're so exhausted, you know, just from getting up, going to work, getting everybody back to the table, taking this one to piano and that one over here to this and this one to that. And then it's church on Wednesday night. And can you get them over there? I'll get them over there. And I look at my daughters now who have kids ranging from 3 to 23. And I see them going through all that. I know your time is up.
Yeah, I think Jacob actually pulled
No,
in.
but I just think that my heart goes out to young parents
Yeah.
who are they want to stay in love, and life is so weighty for them,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so much going on. And I just want to encourage you, stay with it, honor one another. You'll make it through, and you'll be glad you did.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. We can get, you know, because we want to pour into our children, and sometimes it feels like we shift our focus from our spouse to the children, which, I mean, children need us, but we also have to be intentional about the relationship too,
You do.
and making sure that, you know, we're spending time together, or you're spending time together as a couple, a lot of people, when they get to the empty nest, all of a sudden, you know, they don't have a relationship with their spouse anymore. And so they
Yeah,
have
they only know them as a co-parent.
yeah,
And not, I mean, they've lost that lover aspect of it along the
Yeah.
way for some reason. But yeah, I'm sure you've known, and I certainly have
Yeah.
pastored people and known of people who, when their kids left home, they said, "We're done."
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's so sad.
it is.
Just so tragic.
It is.
Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you to Laura once again for bringing your wisdom and your insight. Why don't you share how people can get a hold of you, Ben, or to Laura?
So easiest way is go to our website. It's quiescounseling.com, QUIES. There's a contact page. You can get to our Facebook. You can email us directly from there. Phone number is on there. So again, it's quiescounseling.com.
And if you're watching me on FaceTime or Facebook, you can just leave me a message. If you want it to be private, just get on Messenger and let me know. Otherwise, you can email me at kensheltoninfo@gmail.com. Well, that's it for this week, and we're looking forward to next week and continuing our discussion on foundations of a healthy relationship. And we just thank you for taking the time to share with us and to be with us today. God bless you. We hope that you have a wonderful week. We hope that you have a snowless week. And
I think we're going to get an ice storm this week, Ken. So
yeah.
No,
Right.
no, I don't
All
want it.
right. God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.